can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like $100,000.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders like the founders of RxBar, which actually ended up selling for $600 million to Kellogg. P90X, Tony Horton talks about how he made money as a street mime before he sold hundreds of millions of dollars. Because I love hearing, Laura, like the crappy stories, the challenge stories that people go through. And I felt like when I listened to Shoe Dog, it was like entrepreneurial therapy for me because if he went through all these challenges and crap, it like makes me feel better.
Yeah, it's okay for me.
Somehow, some way. The founder of Baby Einstein, how she overcame cancer twice, and the founder of Atari, how he lost everything and ended up traveling, all over Europe. So just some interesting stories, and this one's going to be much the same. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25, which I co-founded with my business partner, John Corcoran, and our mission is to connect people with their best referral partners and customers. We do that through several done-for-you services, which is a done-for-you event solution. We partner with large conferences or software companies and bring their highest level people into a room. We do that with our done-for-you podcast services, where we help people connect to their best referral partners and clients, and done-for-you lead generation service. And Laura knows this perfectly because she has a done-for-you book service, among other things, which we'll talk about. And so she totally believes helping people connect with their customers, referral partners, whoever, at scale with your book. And we have a mission behind Rise 25, which is, if you go to rise25.com/mission, which is our veteran entrepreneur scholarship. So every event that we do, we look at our database of people who applied, and we choose someone to come. And last time when we did one at Digital Marketers, no longer Digital Marketers, but Traffic and Conversion, because they sold it, but we did one there, and we had someone, we were able to get them a ticket to our VIP event, a ticket to the show, flight, hotel, and food stipend, and they were super appreciative. And so if you know a veteran entrepreneur, or you are one yourself, go to rise25.com/mission and apply. There's a long story behind why that is with my grandfather and my business partner's grandfather, so we'll leave that for another time. But Laura, I'm excited to have Laura. We are in several groups together. We see each other a lot, and I highly respect her work, and I wanted to have her on. And we have Laura Gale, and she got her start as a publicist for Hachette. How do you pronounce it?
Hachette, that's right.
Hachette,
yeah,
which is a global publishing house, and she worked on projects like the Twilight phenomenon, JK Rowling's post-Harry Potter publications, the personal memoirs of Michael Palin, Nelson Mandela, and Tina Fey. Amazing. She was born and raised in Australia, and she started Gale Creative to help entrepreneurs and marketers to write, publish, and market books that transform their businesses. And Laura is also the author. She practices what she preaches. She eats her own dog food. So she's the author of Content That Converts, How to Build a Profitable and Predictable B2B Content Marketing Strategy. And I just try and convince her to get it on Audible, and also to create a course out of this so I can actually consume it in video form, audio form. So probably by the time this comes up, it maybe is available in that format too. She also has a book, which I love the title, How to Write This Book. Someone told me, Laura, that it sells more books. I don't know if this is true. Maybe if you actually show the book to people, whether it's TV or not. So ever since hearing that, if I have an author and if I have the book, I show the book, maybe it will sell more books. I don't know if that works or not. But
I'll keep you posted.
How to write this book, write, publish, and market your business bestseller. She's helped people like our good friend, colleague, mentor Brian Kurtz with Over Deliver, Marcella Allison, Russ Perry, and many more. What are their two book titles with Russ and Marcella?
Marcella's book is Why Didn't Anybody Tell Me This Shit Before?, which is a collection of stories from female entrepreneurs sort of sharing the lessons that they have collected along the way. And Russ Perry's first book was called The Sober Entrepreneur, and we've just finished his second book, which is going to be called... Yes, okay. Correct. It's about his journey from having a fairly chaotic business and personal life in the wake of a pretty serious alcohol addiction to building an extremely successful design company that now hires hundreds of people and serves thousands and thousands of companies. So he's got a really fascinating story, and it was really fun to work with him.
So I'm looking forward to digging into this. And you can check all her stuff out at lauraiswriting.com. Laura, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's very exciting.
So we'll fast forward to the, right now, what's going on with how to write this book. But I wanted to talk about, because you have a really amazing past experience. And so I wanted to dig into kind of separate the projects and then the personal memoirs side. What are some of the lessons you learned from Twilight phenomenon and working on JK Rowling's post-Harry Potter stuff? And you could do both of them. I don't know what sticks out to you.
So I came on board with this publishing house just as the Twilight stuff was taking off. And it was just, it was a juggernaut. Nobody predicted at all how well that book was going to do and how well all of the series would do. And honestly, it was a lesson in being adaptable, because we could not keep the books in stock no matter what we did.
That's a great problem, right?
It's a huge, it's an amazing problem, but it's a huge problem. Because, traditional publishing, the production cycle takes a while. And so we had to come up with some really creative ways to keep the fans engaged and patient, but also to speed up that supply chain and kind of meet the demand in a way that the company just hadn't had to face before.
How'd you keep fans engaged?
So we did a lot of events and a lot of, we did sort of online events where the author was talking to people. We did in-person meetups for fans. There were all kinds of, it was very interactive, and because the audience for that book was quite young, they're very open to experience. And so they're not like, oh, I'm not going to go and hang out with other fans of this book. That's weird. Like they're, 15-year-old girls. And like, of course, I want to go and hang out. And so it's like a good lesson as well in like understanding the psychology of your market and,
right.
and looking at them a little bit objectively. And, I think in marketing, there's always this conversation about get into the mind of your audience and really try to empathize with them and everything. And I think, there's always a place for that. But objectively, what do you know about teenage girls? They love just like hanging out with their friends and being in the midst of
Personally, I know little to nothing about it.
Right. But you can pick that up even from, just cultural tropes. But really understanding that they were super excited about this thing, and it didn't really matter what you did. It was the fact that you were doing something, and just, being appreciative of how enthusiastic they were and not sort of wasting that energy that they were bringing to it. So it was, that whole project, everybody had to be very adaptable and very creative. Working on JK Rowling stuff. So Harry Potter was published by a different house, but when she finished that series, we took over her adult fiction. And so A Casual Vacancy was the first book that she published after Harry Potter. And so, of course, there was this immense amount of expectation and pressure and everybody was kind of on tenterhooks waiting to see what this book was going to be like. And so that was a great lesson in anticipation and how anticipation can be developed and used to ensure that a launch goes very well, but also just how responsive people are to being sort of drip fed good material. So, there were like epic wars among the newspapers to get the first interview with her and to get an exclusive interview. And so, there were book embargoes. So, people, all of the booksellers would get the books at exactly the same moment. It was this huge logistical engineering feat.
How do they do that?
All of the books. It it was an undertaking. I have to say they hired all these fleets of trucks, and they, everybody had to sign NDAs, and there were specific drop points and times, and like it was just this huge like undercover operation, so that everybody would get the book at the same time, and no one could sell it in advance of anybody else, and this was coordinated worldwide. So there was a moment in history basically when this book became available, and people were lining up at bookstores in the middle of the night to get it, and it was fascinating to watch how much anticipation her name brought to that project. Nobody knew what the book was going to be about. Nobody knew. I mean, there was like the back cover blurb, but very, very hidden. And so it was really fascinating to watch how much influence a brand like that can have. Because she is a brand, right? And she's a very appealing brand. She's very down to earth. And I think, like you said about Shoe Dog, she's very relatable because she struggled so hard to get Harry Potter written and published. And she has this amazing life story. But it was a great lesson in building up, ensuring that an event goes really well and has a huge payoff simply by restricting the amount of information that is available around it.
So what did you have to do around that launch and around that book release?
So I was working in publicity, so I was dealing with all of the media on the end of that. So basically organizing all of the events that were going on around it. A lot of places wanted to have like launch events, arranging interviews and book reviews, and she decided that she wasn't going to tour, so we didn't have to manage a book tour. But basically, I was sort of the interface between her little team, sort of managing her end, and the media for the Australian side of it.
So was she doing just over the phone interviews? So was she going in person? She wasn't doing like an in-person tour, or she would still do some of the larger publications?
Some of the large publications she did, I believe, in-person interviews in the UK. So she went to London and I think did, the BBC and, a couple of the like very big newspapers. And then a lot of that material got syndicated. But again, it was, there were sort of all of these exclusivity deals about who could run the interviews and when and where. And so there was just kind of a lot of operational wrangling.
Logistics, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have to go on any of the interviews or no?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
What about the memoir side of things? Like the Nelson Mandela, Tina Fey, Michael Palin, any...
I mean, the production of memoirs is a very interesting process, partly because every publisher wants to release a memoir at a moment where there's a lot of buzz around the author already. And so... obviously like Nelson Mandela and Michael Palin are much older. And so there's kind of always this like, you want to get it out.
Exciting.
Yeah, exactly. But you've got to balance that with, of course, the demands of the rest of their career. And, working on the Tina Fey book was really interesting because she was sort of in full swing when Bossy Pants came out. And she had been doing 30 Rock, and she was starting to get into doing more film, and she was sort of this meteoric rising star. And so again, there was a huge, embargo situation, and same things, just everything had to be super well coordinated, and everybody wanted exclusive deals, and it just takes a lot of publicity is very much about relationship management. And so I was working with another publicist. Fortunately, I was not on my own in that realm, but, you have to spend a lot of time building up great relationships with the media and making sure that those relationships are well cared for. And a lot of that is going into bat for them when maybe there's somewhere that would be easier or more obvious for an author to go. But, there's a lot of, it's a very relational business.
So I want to hear more about the building relationships, what you did to build those relationships and then go to bat for them, because I was just with Perry Marshall discussing this and at his roundtable group, and that's what I think is the key to anything really is relationships. And so I talked about the 80-20 of relationship building, and that to me is the foundation for everything I do, and I know what you do. What were some of the things you learned at that point? How did you build those relationships with those different media channels and actually maintain it and manage it? What's something that sticks out to you?
I have always found the most effective way to build lasting relationships is to get in the same room as the person. And it's one thing to send an email or make a phone call or whatever, but until you have put eyes on them and, shaken hands and had a joke around over some coffee or whatever, it's hard for that person to think of you as anything but just like another voice trying to get their attention. I was listening yesterday to an interview, Brian Koppelman's podcast, The Moment. He was interviewing General Stanley McChrystal, and McChrystal was talking about coordinating thousands of people, in military situations where there needs to be an overflow of information, but everybody's very siloed. And so until you can get people in a room, there's this us versus them kind of dynamic that can really solidify, and it stops the flow of information. And so I think that's something that I ended up kind of doing intuitively by feel, because I just wasn't getting anywhere by sending emails and making phone calls.
What would you do? Were you in Australia at the time?
Yeah, this was in Sydney. And so I would find out where somebody worked. So say I wanted to get an interview with a journalist at the Australian newspaper. I would find out where they worked, like which department they were in at their newspaper, write them a note, like a handwritten note, send it to them, and then follow up a couple of days later with a phone call just saying like, hey, did you get my note? Do you want to grab a coffee this week? So I would go over to them, make it super easy for them, go to the closest coffee shop to their building, buy them a coffee, just sit down, ask them about what they're interested in writing about. And, often people are responsible for a specific type of book or a specific type of media, different specific type of content. And so you kind of want to go with stuff that's already relevant to them. So you can't just turn up and be like, hey, you tell me what you need. You sort of need to turn up being like, I know what you need. I've put in the effort to research it. I have a clear sense of the kind of stuff that you already like to work on. Of course, you don't want to go in and be like, I know everything about you. But like
creepy. I have pictures on my wall in my bedroom.
Yeah, you wanted to be sort of like, I've done my homework. I'm not like turning up at your house tonight. So going with some ideas about what they could do with material that you've got coming up. So say I have 3 books in the next 6 months that are going to be relevant for them. I don't want to be pitching them anything else. Like, I just want their focus to be
You want to understand what their focus is and then deliver something that's relevant to them.
And go with some ideas about what they could do with it, because, they get hundreds of pitches every week. And if they have to come up with the new idea, the cool angle for every single project, that's exhausting. And so if you can go clearly differentiated already because you've made the effort to turn up, you've made the effort to do your research, and you go with some hooks or some headlines or some, cool angles.
You make their job as easy as humanly possible.
Make it easy. Yeah. It just, at that point, all they have to do is say yes. And it's,
like I just wrote the article for you. Here you go.
I mean, I would do this. I would write a headline and some key body ideas and just be like, here's some stuff I thought that might be useful. I've had a chance to talk with the author. They think that this could be a cool approach or whatever. And so you go and just hand them kind of a ready-made thing. They just have to join the dots, and I try still to do that with people. Whenever I'm starting a new project, I want to get as much research done on the client as I can. I want to know everything about their previous work. The more information I have, the better, because I can just go to them and be like, here's my assessment of everything that we should be talking about. Is there anything else that you think we should add? And they can go, oh, yeah, we need to add ABC. Or, no, you got it all. Let's start. It just makes it really easy.
So I want to talk about, Laura, the craziest thing you've done to get a hold of someone or build a relationship. But before we talk about that, I'll give you a second to think about it. But I know, like me, you kind of geek out on the direct response marketing, and you mentioned headlines. And when did you first really start to decide this is a priority? I want to start to study or work with or learn from some of the greats of direct response.
I think it was probably 2011. The publishing industry was really struggling at the time. The industry as a whole sort of hadn't learnt from the music industry and hadn't seen how much digital was going to affect the industry. And so a lot of people were being laid off and all of this sort of thing. And so while I still had a job and I was reasonably successful, I sort of felt like I need to get a little bit more autonomy in my career situation. And so I thought, I already know how to write. Maybe I will learn to write stuff for online. And everybody has the same idea, right? There's countless people that are writing content online. And so there had to be a way to kind of stand out a bit from that and to produce material that was going to be effective for the people I was writing for. And so someone gave me a couple of book recommendations. There was Claude Hopkins' Scientific Advertising and a couple of the other kind of great.
What are your favorites?
I mean, Scientific Advertising is up there. Ogilvy on Advertising, very, very insightful.
Over-delivered. And then no, at the time that wasn't out. You had to write down, help write that one. It would
have been awesome if I had that at the time. But I went through a program called Copy Hour, which is basically you spend a couple of months writing copy by hand, and you sort of learn by doing, just by emulating what really great copywriters have produced in the past. And so that gave me a really strong foundation. So when I started writing for clients and producing some of my own stuff online, it just meant that there was a much clearer next step for the audience, which I think makes a really big difference. You can kind of lead people to an action, which I think differentiates whether or not you're going to thrive as a writer. It's one thing to be able to give somebody a great piece of content, but if they just absorb it and then forget about it, then you've kind of wasted that attention. If you can lead them then to a next action, whether that's a consult or a service or whatever, that's kind of where the real momentum comes from.
Mm-hmm. And so, those are amazing books. One of my favorites is Joe Sugarman's book. I think I have it here, actually. Adweek Copywriting Handbook. I thought that's one of my favorites. It's just so simple. It's just like, what's the goal of the headline? To get him the subhead. What's the goal of the subhead? To get him to the first sentence. It's like, okay, that makes sense, So craziest thing you've done to get a hold of someone or build a relationship. I remember I was talking to a Gary Halbert protege, and it was like midnight, and we were, exciting topic of what's the best lumpy mail package you've ever got received or sent, and we talked for an hour about that. But so I'm curious for you, what is something out of the ordinary you've done to build a relationship or to get a hold of someone?
I sent a lot of lumpy mail when I was in publicity, because you get proof copies of a book. So obviously you maybe get 100 copies that you can send to media and whatever to get sort of early buzz. And so this was always one of my favorite parts of that job, was coming up with a cool way to send these books. Because, you can just stick it in an envelope and send it. That's fine, but boring. And so, one thing, we had a guy called Justin Cronin who wrote a book called The Passage, which is a fantastic trilogy for fans of like zombie and apocalyptic like stuff. Amazing. But a big part of that book was the role of sunlight. And so, when the light went out, then all the bad things happened. And so I went out and bought a ton of candles and wrapped up each book in like a really scrappy old piece of paper, which looked like it had just been through a wasteland, and tied a candle up in it and like on the book, and wrote this like kind of desperate handwriting, like, don't let the lights go out.
Like Stephen King movie.
Yeah. And then sort of had them all hand delivered to these journalists. So that got a lot of interest just because, it's just a bit different. It's not like a really crazy, like, haven't.
It's a fun, creative way.
It's fun,
It would freak me out. I'd be like, I'm not touching this thing. Some psychos.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of it, in terms of like the craziest thing I've done to get in touch with somebody, I've definitely gone down a lot of rabbit holes on the internet to find out where I can send stuff to people, because I just want to be able to, like, lump email, I think, and this is why books are also so powerful, is that it just gets past gatekeepers, right? Like, no one is going to stop a personal package to their boss or to the higher up, you know, because everyone wants to get that stuff, right? And so if you have something cool to send them, it sort of automatically brings a lot of the defenses down. So I spend a lot of time finding the right places to send stuff to people.
You did some work for companies for online content too, like Natural Stacks. I talked to Roy, and they have this amazing story you should check out. And the opener of that interview is one of my favorites, because I don't remember if they talked about it at the time, but they'd sponsored that World Series of Poker player.
Yeah.
So I pipe in the video from that. So if you just check out even the first minute of that, it's remarkable. You know, it's featured on ESPN. They did a whole documentary on it. What were some of the things that worked as far as the writing goes for content marketing for like an e-commerce company?
Again, it's kind of looking at the audience and trying to understand what they are trying to get out of this purchase. Working with Natural Stacks was really fun because I also had a very studious time early in my life. And so when I was at the publishing house, I also did a nutrition degree studying at night. And so working with Natural Stacks was kind of a perfect blend because I got to use both parts of my interest. And so I was sort of looking at what are people looking to get out of, say, a Siltep, which is the supplement that the poker player was using when he won that world championship. Like,
it's like a cognitive enhancer, what you'd say, neurotropic, whatever the term is.
Exactly. Sort of just like makes you very sharp, sort of like a caffeine, but without the jittery, side effects. And so trying to think about what people are aiming for, because it's not like, I want to have greater cognitive function. That's not what is.
They don't care about that.
Like, they don't care about
that. They want a result.
They're like, I want to impress my boss tomorrow, or I am drowning in the amount of work I have to do. I need something that's going to make me go faster. Like, it's, trying to understand what their real underlying reason is, and then what the emotion is underneath that reason. Because, I think I once read that humans have 5 key emotions, and it's fear, anger, sadness, desire, and joy. And so if you can kind of niche down to like what the story they are telling themselves is, and then dig even further under that and identify what that emotion is, then it makes it much easier to create content that speaks directly to that emotion. And it makes them feel like you know them better than they know themselves, because a lot of people haven't been like, oh, I want to impress my boss tomorrow. Underneath that, I'm scared that he's going to be mad at me, or that I'm not going to be doing a good job, or whatever. And so if you can kind of
and then I may get fired, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Don't get fired. Buy Siltep.
Maybe not that fine a point.
Yeah, okay.
But, it's if you can identify people's feelings for them and say, like, here's why this is the right solution, because it speaks specifically to that key emotion that you're having, then people are very receptive, and it's very easy to kind of lead them in the right direction. There's a lot of responsibility with that, and I talk a lot with people about the ethical responsibility that you have in marketing to make sure that, armed with that knowledge, you're not abusing people. But it was a really great opportunity in content marketing to really learn across multiple different industries what's motivating people. Because at the end of the day, all of what we do here is about people's emotions. That's kind of what it comes down to. And so if you understand that at a fundamental level, you'll always be able to get a result.
So how was the shift from working at a company to breaking out on your own? Did you do that? Was that a gradual process? Because I know you kind of saw this trend of the publishing companies and the new media. And it seems like you were trying to equip yourself to prepare for that. I guess kind of like a survivalist. You're like packing stuff in not like the same thing, but What was that transition like for you? Was it cold turkey? Was it slow?
So initially it was cold turkey. I quit the publishing house and went out on my own. I was writing about nutrition stuff. I was seeing a lot online of like bodybuilding competitors or like extreme athletes, and there was nothing for your sort of average person. And so I wanted to sort of fill that space where there's most people are residing. And so sort of started creating a lot of content around that, and then realized that nobody wants to be average. And the reason that all of these products online were about these very extreme things is because people want to be remarkable. And so that business did not go great.
It's interesting.
And so part of the process was being like, okay, why isn't this working? What do I need to understand to make a business work? Specifically, if I'm going to be writing a lot. And so going into content marketing was a really good way of learning all of that stuff. I kind of got to apply in practice everything that I'd learned in theory from all of those books and from Copy Hour. And it really made me internalize a bunch of stuff. So I was doing mostly retainer work with a large group of clients. So I was writing across a lot of different industries. So yeah, it sort of went cold turkey, work on retainer with a bunch of different people. I worked with Natural Stacks for a year exclusively, and then kind of came to the end of that, and somebody asked me to help them write a book. And I had this light bulb moment of like, I have all of the skills to write a book. I did a degree in writing and publishing. I've worked in publishing industry. I know exactly what that process is. I love writing, but I get really, I was getting agitated writing really short form stuff because you can't get like deep into something. And so a book kind of felt like this perfect solution. And since then, that's all I've done.
Why did they ask you? What prompted that?
So the first one was a book about life insurance, which on the surface seems very boring. But the guy, Jeff Root, he's a life insurance agent, but he saw the same thing, this huge digital transformation coming down on the industry, and decided that he would teach other life insurance agents how to run their business online, because that's basically door-to-door sales, that industry originally. And so to be able to set up a website and have a chat bot and all of this stuff, where it's a whole new world for a lot of people.
It's groundbreaking for them.
Yeah, exactly. And so he basically wanted to have a book as kind of the interface between the old world and the new world, teaching people that here's all of this stuff that you need to do. Here's my credibility piece because I've written a book. I'm an established author. And, at the end of that book, they were, the call to action was to come and be part of his membership community. And so it was kind of a cool experiment to see direct response being transplanted into the book world. And I was just totally hooked. Yeah.
Why did he ask you? How did you know?
I was in a forum online called the Dynamite Circle, which was a online entrepreneurs forum. Basically, it was, I think the tagline was like curing entrepreneurial loneliness. It was very much oriented to people who were sort of working on their own and had these little businesses, but were doing fine, but needed other people around them. And so he and I had been in that for a while, and I'd done quite a lot of content work for a lot of people in that community. And someone said to him, he was throwing this idea around, and someone said, well, it sounds like long form content marketing, so why don't you ask Laura if she can do it? And, that's... Yeah.
I want to talk about, Laura, your book, and then some of the people you've helped with their book. But would you call yourself a ghostwriter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I feel like I was thinking about this in the car the other day, and I was thinking that's sort of a tough position, to be in sometimes or challenging in some ways, because people want to keep you as their best kept secret. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's just what I was thinking about. And you're not on people's book. You help them and probably drag the content out of them sometimes. But what's their sentiments usually of sharing that you help them or not, and giving credit or not? I know obviously Brian Kurtz doesn't care at all. He's like, Laura's amazing. She helped me with over deliver, and he shouts you from the rooftops. But I imagine there's many people who, it's just you're in the background, like, this is my book and I'm the star, and I'm really, not going to share the limelight. So there's probably a lot of people you can't share who you've worked with. What's more typical?
More typically, people are happy to acknowledge my help. I'm not on, the cover of most of the books, but I'm always in the acknowledgements. Over the years, my view of my role is to enable growth in the entrepreneurial community by helping entrepreneurs tell their stories. And so many entrepreneurs have gone down because they just didn't know what they didn't know. And I hate to see that. And it's just such a waste to me. And so I'm not really bothered by not being front and center, because the purpose for me is more about getting that information out there. If you can shortcut somebody's learning curve, then the impact they are able to have in the world just becomes exponential. And so I'm not that worried about it. Most of the time, people are very open about having worked with me. Some will say, she's my developmental editor, or she's my book doctor, or she's my publishing consultant, or whatever. The term ghostwriter, I think, still has like a funny connotation to it. It's got this very like backroom vibe.
Right.
But, most of the time people are very upfront about that. And, I always negotiate that I will be able to use the book that we produce together as a way of marketing my services. And so, I'm not necessarily shouting it from the rooftops that I worked with so-and-so. And some people I will be a little bit more
discreet about.
But people who have been very public in acknowledging that we've worked together, like Brian, I think, it's fine.
One skill that you have that's tremendous, and you have to when you have a book, when you're helping someone write a book, is pulling out the best content and stories, and that's what makes everything interesting. So I'm really curious of some of the methods or ways you get the best stories out of people when you're talking to them.
A big part of this, and you would know from doing this show, is doing your research, because people talk a lot about all kinds of things, but they, I think, often find themselves with a very polished spiel about how they ended up where they are. And so I always want to find the weak spots in that spiel and like pull on it a little bit. Because that's where the interesting stories are. You can sort of say, well, I saw the writing on the wall and it was time to make a change in my career, and so I learned to do copywriting and now I write books. And like that's all very easy to say, but okay, like how long did that take you? Where did you fail? Who was your first client? What was that about? Like what was your psyche at that time? There's so many questions that you can ask in all of those little spiels. And so I try to listen to interviews they've done and read the content they've produced. But mostly I ask them a question and shut up. The power of silence is astounding in getting people to tell you stuff because people are super uncomfortable in silence, and so they will just keep talking. So if you can ask an interesting question that they don't have to answer very often, and so they think about it a little bit, and then just like wait, they'll keep talking.
Interesting. So yeah, and so you do a lot of research that helps you get some of the best stories because you see some of the where they didn't add color to something and kind of point that out and have them expand on it.
But a lot of it also, I do a lot of structural work before we get into actually producing the material. We're very clear about the strategy of the book, the role the book is going to play in the business's marketing ecosystem. I really want a robust structure and a very clear sense of where we're going with the material before we start ever doing interviews for it or anything like that, because it's very easy in these kinds of conversations to get on tangents that might be very interesting but are completely irrelevant to the book. They may be very educational or insightful, but maybe that's for a different book, and you've got to be able to filter the material you get to make sure that the final product is as polished and focused as possible. So a lot of it is preparing myself in a way, orienting myself to the right kinds of questions and making sure that I'm following the right threads, not just the interesting threads.
Right. Yeah, so you kind of have to map it out, like in the life insurance example. Like if he starts talking about some story about there's nothing to do with taking life insurance to the digital age, it may be interesting, but you may kind of throw it out and kind of focus them back on to what the goal is.
Yeah, and that can be hard for the client a lot of the time, because, the reason these books are interesting is that it's not always just about the business. It's very much about their life. And for a lot of people, this is their life's work. And so it's very difficult to hear somebody say that's not relevant. And so
that story about your mom, not relevant.
Not really coming to the point here. So, a lot of it is just making sure that I am being respectful and empathetic to their experience, but also making sure I sort of shepherd them to the right material. Because in the end, it doesn't serve them to have interesting but useless information in their book. So yeah, a lot of it is just making sure that I'm sort of in my element and we're all prepared, and just being willing to listen and keep asking questions.
I know one of the biggest things for you is, and you have a lot of opinions on this matter, is when you have a book, how do you best launch the book? And I know it starts before you actually finish the book, but what's some of the kind of the timeline that you look at with launching the book?
So whenever I start talking to a new client, I ask them to start marketing immediately, because say it takes us 3 or 4 months to write the book, there is so much material that is going to get produced in that time that they can use to start building that anticipation that we talked about earlier. And so, if you can drip out little bits of interesting content, not only does it prime your audience to be ready for the main event, it also will bring new people to your audience. And so it's kind of a virtuous cycle in that you're teaching and sharing a lot of valuable information, which kind of primes people to think, like, if this is what they're teaching now before the book is even here, imagine how good that's going to be. And so it kind of just puts people in the right frame of mind. There's a lot, obviously, with social media that you can do with we do interviews like this, a couple of times a week for a few hours. There is a lot of good material that you can chop up and use for social media and for your email list and for opt-in material and all of that kind of thing. And I'm a big believer in having a multi-purpose approach to your content. So if you are going to write a book, great, but you can also use a couple of the chapters as blog posts. You can also use the interviews as YouTube material. You can have voice recordings and make a podcast season out of it. There's so much stuff that you can do with that material. It's such a waste if it's just used one way, because not everybody learns the same way. Like you were saying before, some people are going to do better with an audiobook. Some people are going to learn better through doing a course. A lot of people will respond better to video than to reading. So you kind of have to meet your audience where they're at a little bit and give them the options that are going to work best for them. So I think that's part of marketing the book, is understanding how all of that information needs to be presented differently. The actual launch is really no different to any other product launch. You want to make sure that you have an enthusiastic audience that has been primed for the launch. You want to have some micro commitments along the way where they maybe put in a pre-order, or they commit to coming onto a webinar, or they, people show commitment with their wallets and with their calendars. And so you want to get them saying yes to you in advance of the book coming out, so that when you launch it and it's available and you ask them to make a purchase, then it's a natural thing for them to say yes and to feel good about that. obviously there's kind of all of the regular stuff. You can do affiliates, you can do social media, there's email campaigns, there's lumpy mail campaigns, and I really recommend lumpy mail, particularly when your audience is kind of an affluent group. You know, they're used to getting lots of advertising and all this kind of thing, but lumpy mail, like we said before, is a really great way to kind of cut past any gatekeepers and to be a bit more, bit of a pattern interrupt in their day. The other great thing with books is that they tend to be evergreen. So it's not like you have to launch it once and be done with it. You can launch it every month if you want to, with different campaigns, you know. And I talk about this a lot with people, like, start with the stuff that you're good at and that you like doing. So if you like podcasting, then do a whole podcast season on your book. You know, interview people who are related to it and make it a really focused thing that you do, and just do it really well. And then once you're done with that, then move on to doing something else. You know, you don't have to do it all simultaneously, because the lifetime of a book is very long. And so you can re-release extra editions later down the line if you want to. You can produce new material related to the book. There's so many things you can do, but people get kind of psyched out about launching books. And I just tell people, like, do as much as you can with the resources that you have at the time, but keep an eye on the long tail, because you can do something new every month for, you know, an indefinite period of time. So, and Amazon particularly, you know, for people who are self-publishing, Amazon is obviously the giant in this space, but the more consistent your sales are, the more the book is recommended. And so there's actually a pretty strong argument for keeping some of your powder dry early on. So launch, but keep some campaigns for the next couple of months, so that you can kind of get that sustained sales velocity, which in turn will improve the sales velocity over the lifetime of the book.
Do you have an opinion, self-published versus publisher?
I think both have their place. Self-publishing is my preferred option because it allows you to retain all creative control of the project. For marketers and entrepreneurs particularly, this is very important because you've probably got a lot of ideas about how you want to put the book to use. And if you have a traditional publisher, there will be instances that you will not be able to do what you want with it. Particularly in the case, you know, if you're kind of a brand name, as happened with JK Rowling, if they decide to embargo the book, no one gets it until launch day. And so that's very difficult to use for any marketing. You don't want to be breaking any rules about who gets what and when. You know, there's an extraordinary amount of reach that a traditional publisher can generate for you, and there's still a lot of cachet in having one of the big publishing houses take you on, but it also extends the timeline for the project significantly. For most people, if you go with a finished book, you know, it's written, it's edited, it's pretty much done, you'll still wait a year before your book is in the market, often at least.
And your timeline looks like?
I mean, if we start today, it will be in the market within 6 months. So, and you get to kind of retain all of the control over the title and the cover, how it's marketed, how you use it before the launch, how you use it after the launch. You get to buy it at cost, which is another big factor. You know, if you go through a publishing house, then they will have a say on the cover and the title, how it's marketed, what you can do with it before and after the launch date. There becomes it becomes a much more restricted process for the author. For a novelist or somebody who is not using their book as a marketing tool for their business, I think that going with a publisher is probably an ideal scenario if you're looking for not just the money. Like if you're interested in being part of the literary community, or you're wanting to be famous in some way, or you think that it would make a good movie, then really, yes, you do need to have a publisher. But if you're looking to retain as much control of the project as you can, and a lot of novelists are doing this as well, where, you know, you can write an entire series of books, release them on Amazon on, you know, any given day, and you'll have a ready-made audience who buy all 6 of your books because you've released them simultaneously. They don't have to wait a year or 2 or 3 for the next one to come out. And this is kind of an interesting overflow effect of Netflix and the kind of binge watching pattern that we're all into now. Like, people want to binge read. And so that traditional publishing model where you drip out a book every 2 or 3 years does not work, particularly for a younger audience who's impatient and used to being able to get their content on demand. So, even for a lot of novelists, self-publishing is kind of the ideal outcome. But again, it really depends. Brian wanted to go with a traditional publisher because over-deliver is his life's work. It's his magnum opus, and he really wanted to get it in as many hands as possible and have as much reach as possible. And so going with Hay House was kind of a perfect option for him because they have a direct response element in their business already. And so it's kind of a blending of the worlds. He got a lot of uses he wanted to have and had a lot of flexibility there. But, for most people, I think going the traditional publishing route is very time consuming, and it's still very stratified. It's not a democratized industry like some others are, and so there's a lot of upside to retaining the control of it yourself.
Laura, what about different approaches you've seen for selling, like actually selling, meaning, you see people do free plus shipping, or maybe they release it for 99 cents for a week. What are the different approaches you've seen that have worked, and all of them are different for actually pricing and releasing to get to bestseller or whatever the goal is?
So this is really dependent on the purpose of the book for you. So if your goal is to just sell as many books as possible, then I'd say, launch free or cheap. Keep that price point low for a couple of days. Do a big push to all of your audience and network and everything to get that initial sales velocity going. Do a pre-launch so that you get a big spike in sales, because pre-launch sales count the day that you launch. They're not accumulated over time. They all count that first day. So if you can get like a big kind of avalanche effect the first day, then that's good for the velocity. But if you are looking to, say, use the book as a positioning tool, then probably the free or 99-cent deal is not the right play for you. If the book is normally going to sell at $50 or something, you're really using it as like an authority tool. You don't want to have it really cheap up front, because that completely ruins the positioning of it. I would say that free plus shipping offers are useful if you have the wherewithal to manage it. Basically, to do that, you need to handle all of the sales yourself. So you would need to order the copies of the book and have your team fulfill those orders, or there are some printers who will integrate with Amazon and do the fulfillment for you. But, it takes a lot of heavy lifting to get those arrangements set up, and it's slow, and there's a lot of failure points. So I think free plus shipping kind of sounds great, but there's a lot of downside to it. Yeah. The upside, of course, is that you get people's details. And, they've also made a direct purchase from you, which, you can kind of ladder them up a sequence of other purchases, which is always good. So again, it really depends on what the purpose of the book is. I think price strategy is an interesting one. You can indicate a lot about what a person should think about a book by how it's priced. So if you price it very low, probably people are not going to take it very seriously. If you price it very high, then you'd better have some pretty good stuff in there. You'll orient people to the type of book that it is by how it's priced and also how it's fulfilled. So if you can't get it on Amazon, people are going to be like, that's weird. But, maybe you have a very loyal audience and you really only care about promoting your business to that audience, in which case the free plus shipping really makes sense, and not having it available anywhere else gives it that exclusivity and that kind of anticipation. So there are as many different ways to market books as there are authors and audiences, and it really does depend on what the goal of the book is. And so this is why I'm so bullish on being clear about the strategy, how it's going to fit into the rest of your marketing ecosystem. You really want to have it dialed in so that your every piece around launching the book supports that single goal.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about yours. How to write this book. What should people know about this?
That book is the distillation of everything I've learned about writing books about business. So not everybody is going to be able to work with me. Obviously, I have a limited amount of time. It takes several months for me to write a book. And so I don't want that to be the limiting factor on how many entrepreneurs get their stories out there. And for a lot of people, the process of writing a book is just very daunting because you don't know where to start. It's got this kind of big, like, cultural weight around it. And, people kind of, again, psych themselves out about doing it. And so I wanted to make a very, very detailed, very practical guide to doing it. So you could read that book, follow every step, and you would end up with the same outcome that I would get.
It's very thorough.
Going through this process.
I mean, you even have a part that's dealing with ISBNs.
It's boring.
It's that. Well, no, but someone who's writing a book,
when
they get to that point, they're like, "What the heck do I do with this?" I mean, it's a total. It's a a pothole in the road for someone who's trying to write a book.
Exactly.
For most people who don't care about writing, that's boring. But for someone who's trying to get it to completion, it's necessary.
Yeah,
what's something in here?
There are so many little things like that.
Yeah, what's something in here that mentally is one of the biggest hang-ups for people for writing a book? What have you found?
There are a couple. First is finding the time.
Totally.
There's a lot, obviously for an entrepreneur running their own business, the business doesn't stop because you decide to write a book. And so it takes a bit of doing to make the time to do the writing. And so, I talk a lot about finding a routine and a rhythm that is going to work for you. Talk a lot as well about keeping your psychology in check, because there's this kind of whole thing about writing that it's super hard and that you're going to suffer and it's going to be awful and, you're just going to hate your life for the whole time. But it doesn't have to be like that. And I really don't think that it should be like that. And so I wanted to kind of give people some tools for their own behavior and psychology to make it a productive and positive experience rather than something that they just suffer through. But also things like dealing with the editing. Like, people get stuck in editing all the time because you go through this huge process of writing your first draft and you get to the end of the draft and you feel like you're done. There's a natural sort of stop point there, because you've done the thing, it's all out of you, but you can't publish that first draft. It's just going to be a mess. A lot of it. There's going to be typos. There's going to be threads that go nowhere. There's going to be irrelevant material. So you have to go back and go through the editing process. Editing is where a good book is made. And so I really spend a lot of time helping explain why that is and sort of trying to show the benefits of it, but also not minimizing how much internal resource that is likely to demand of somebody. I think that's kind of one of the biggest issues is not knowing at the beginning what that sequence of events has to be, not anticipating that you have to go back to the start in editing is where so many people just stop. That's why there are so many first drafts in people's desk drawers.
Right.
They just stop at that
point. Laura, so last question I always, and people should check out lauraiswriting.com and check out your website and what you're working on, and where can people find the podcast also?
So,
will they be able to find it on the website, or is there a separate domain?
Yeah, there will be links up there, but the new podcast is called Business of Writing. So the website for that is going to be businessofwritingpodcast.com. I'll be interviewing writers from all different disciplines there. So ghostwriters, journalists, content marketers, copywriters, academics, all kinds of stuff, and finding out how they run the business side of their writing career.
So you could find that at lauraiswriting.com. And so last question, Laura, and thank you, this has been awesome, is I always ask as an Inspired Insider, what's been a low moment, a challenging moment, and then what's been a proud moment on the flip side?
I think a low moment, certainly early on, realizing that my big, great idea was actually something that nobody wanted. Writing nutrition for normal people is not exciting enough. So it was really painful to realize, like, I am a total beginner at this and I have no idea what I'm doing, and it's daunting to realize how little you know about a field. So that was certainly, I remember I was traveling in Asia at the time and just like sitting on my bed in my like tiny rented apartment being like, what have I done? Like, this was terrible. But since then, I think I needed that moment because it kind of got my ego in the right place and helped me realize, like, this doesn't happen unless you get the right people around you and get the right education.
The reality is, at that point, though, I mean, you still have to eat, right? So how do you make ends meet when something you're doing isn't working?
Well, at that point, this was sort of in the age of content farms. So I was just writing like dozens of articles every week that I cared nothing about.
Just hustling.
Just like writing about everything that someone would pay me for, basically. Yeah, I think everybody goes through a moment where there's like you just got to pay the bills. Fortunately, that phase did not last too long because I realized, like, I will just burn out and die if I keep doing this. Like, you can't write for 12 hours a day and not burn out. Like, it just doesn't go that way. So I think the kind of flow on of that moment was that I got so exhausted that I was forced to find a better way. And what is that saying? Necessity is the mother of invention. So that was certainly that moment for me. And all it took was getting one client who thought, like, oh yeah, I could use some content. And I think just getting that first one was enough that it like pulled me out of the kind of depressive
right.
state.
Yeah.
and made me realize, like, it was possible to do this if I was just diligent. I guess a really proud moment was, I mean, this is very recent, but at Titans this past April, we were in Cleveland together, and Brian was sort of talking about over deliver up in front of everybody, and he sort of held it up, and he just looked so happy that book is done and that it's out in the world. And I just felt like, yeah, this is what it's about. Like, I helped him, and he's just got the most amazing store of knowledge. He's just so accomplished and has such a great strategic mind that I'm really, really proud to have enabled him to get that out to more people.
Yeah. I mean, I had him as one of my slides in my talk about 100-0 and just giving and not expecting anything in return. And at least 5 people came up to me. One's like, oh, I just read that on the plane ride over. Or, there were multiple people in the room that had it and they were in the middle of reading it. So what you both have created and is touching people beyond what you even know about. So
yeah,
thank you.
No, that makes me super proud.
Yeah. So thank you, Laura. This has been great. Everyone check out lauraiswriting.com. Check out her work. Check out the podcast. Very appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like $100 grand.